In Sencha Touch, the component and container form the basic building blocks for creating an interface. Each container can be assigned a layout, which handles the positioning of its inner items. The layouts work either by neatly arranging the components to use the available space, or by showing just one component at a time and providing some way of changing the focus between them. In this tutorial, we'll see each different layout type in action, then see how they can be combined in any manner you can think of. The default layout type is Auto. This causes a component to behave much like a regular block-level element in an HTML document. The component will fill the entire available width, but it will only occupy as much height as is required to accommodate the content. If we want to make a component fill the entire available space, we can use the Fit layout type. This causes the component to fill the entire available height as well as width. The Fit layout is perfect so long as we only want to add a single item to a container. If we add a second item, it replaces the first, but in a Fit layout there's no way of changing which card is active. The card layout is similar to Fit in that it only displays a single component at a time. Whereas the Fit layout can only accommodate a single item, the card layout will accommodate multiple components. Let's assign this container to a variable when we instantiate it. We'll use the Sencha namespace, which is set up for us when we specify the name of our application. Now we can access it in the JavaScript console. Our container uses a card layout and holds 3 items: red, amber, and green. If we look at it in the browser, you'll see that only the first component is visible. In the console, we can manipulate the container programmatically. Calling sencha.container.setActiveItem1 will reveal the amber component, and calling setActiveItem2 will reveal the green component. The card layout provides a programmatic interface for switching focus between components, but it doesn't provide a user interface. In Sencha Touch, there are 2 specialized kinds of container that do provide a user interface to the card layout: the carousel and the tab panel. So let's have a look at these. Let's change this component into a tab panel. We no longer need to specify the layout, since the tab panel uses a card layout by default. Finally, we'll specify that our application requires the ext.tabPanel component. This tells the class loader to prefetch the necessary modules from the Sencha Touch library. Let's refresh the page in the browser. We now have a tabbed user interface. I can click on each tab button to activate its corresponding content. By default, the tab panel will use a slide transition when switching focus, but we can override this with the values fade, slide, flip, cube, or wipe. We still have access to the setActiveItem function, which we can use to change the focus between the inner items programmatically. Let's switch the tab panel for a carousel. Again, this uses a card layout, so only one component is visible at a time. But instead of using tabs to switch, I can just swipe from side to side. Notice too how the indicator at the bottom gives a sense of how many items there are and which page we are on. By default, the carousel works horizontally, but the direction parameter can be set to either horizontal or vertical. So far, we've seen that the Fit layout is suitable for holding a single component, and that the card layout can hold multiple components, but it will only display one at a time. So what if we want to display more than one component simultaneously? Well, that's where the HBox and VBox layouts come in. Let's switch this card layout for VBox. Now, all three components are visible. Each occupies the full available width, but only takes up as much height as its content requires. It's as though each of the three items is set with Layout Auto. The pack parameter is set to start by default, but it can also take the values center and end. This affects the vertical positioning of the items. We can control the vertical height of each individual component using the flex parameter. This specifies the proportion of vertical space that each component will occupy. If we set flex to 1 for each component, they will occupy the same amount of height. What we've done here is to specify the value for flex on every component within the box. But there's a less repetitive way of doing this, which is to create a default object including the flex parameter. Now we can remove the flex setting from each individual item. The VBox layout arranges components vertically. There's also an HBox layout, which distributes inner items horizontally. This too can be tweaked using pack and flex parameters, but each one works from left to right rather than from top to bottom. Every panel can be treated as a component in itself or as a container for other panels. So it's possible to nest components together using different layouts for each one. Here we have a full screen container which contains 3 panels arranged using a VBox layout. Flex has been set to 1, so as to use all the available space. Each of the 3 child components is a carousel, itself containing 3 panels of different colours. If we take a look at this in the browser, you'll see 3 strips of colour stretching to fill the available vertical space. That's the VBox behaviour. But each coloured panel is itself just one of 3 cards arranged in a carousel, so I can swipe each of these to mix and match the colours. Let's take this to the next level and switch out the inline styles with classes. In our style sheet, we have a few rules that apply a background image to each panel in the carousel. Refresh the browser, and now I get to switch the head, torso and legs of a little monster. I found these illustrations on Flickr, and they are distributed under a Creative Commons license. That means I can remix and redistribute them so long as I give credit to the original artist. So let's add one more component containing a link to the illustrator's website. Watch what happens if we add this directly to the items array. The VBox layout causes this item to occupy the same amount of vertical space as the 3 carousels. I would prefer to make the panel containing the credits take up no more room than it needs to. Ideally, that would mean docking it to the bottom of the containing panel. This can be achieved simply by setting the docked property to bottom. And that achieves the desired result. When a component is docked, it sticks to the specified edge of its container. In practice, you'll find that many common interface patterns for building mobile applications are provided by one of Sencha Touch's more specialized components. But the layouts covered in this episode will be a great help on those occasions when you need to build something more bespoke. The code used in this demonstration can be found on GitHub. I've created a separate branch for every checkpoint, so each time you see a card like this one, it means that you can check out a snapshot of the code in its current state at that point in the screencast. You can find instructions on how to view these snapshots in the repository's README file.